The silence in the office was the wrong kind. It was not the peaceful, settled quiet of a building at rest, but the stretched, waiting silence of a held breath. Elara Vance felt it in the fine hairs on her arms, a hum of unease that had nothing to do with the late hour or the sterile blue light of her monitor. It was 10 past midnight on a Tuesday, and she was, as usual, the last one on the 47th floor, the last one except for him. Marcus Thorne, the man who owned the company, the floor, and, in his own estimation, her. She was finalizing the quarterly risk analysis for the Kaido Mori merger, a report that bore her intellectual fingerprints on every page but would be presented under his name. This was the architecture of their relationship. She built the monuments, he cut the ribbons. For 3 years she had endured it, a slow erosion of self packaged as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. She told herself it was a stepping stone, but the stone had become a millstone, and she was sinking. The exhaustion was a physical weight now, a shawl of lead draped over her shoulders. She felt thin, stretched, like a photograph left too long in the sun. A low murmur of voices drifted from Marcus's corner office, the one with the panoramic view of the city's glittering spine. She had assumed he'd left. He usually made a grand show of his departure, a whirlwind of expensive cologne and back-slapping bonhomie for any junior associate unlucky enough to be in his path. But tonight, he was still here, and he was not alone. The door was ajar, a sliver of warm light cutting across the cool gray carpet. Elara did not mean to listen. She was a creature of quiet efficiency, of keeping her head down and her work impeccable. Eavesdropping was not in her nature. It was messy, imprecise. But the tone caught her first. It was not the booming, performative confidence Marcus used for conference calls. It was something else, a low, conspiratorial hiss, venomous and sharp. She muted the soft classical music playing through her headphones, the silence rushing in to fill the void. "The problem is Quan," Marcus said. His voice was stripped of its usual charm, leaving behind something raw and ugly. "He doesn't bend. He doesn't even acknowledge the pressure. It's like trying to negotiate with a mountain." Another voice, gravelly and unfamiliar, rumbled in response. "Mountains can be moved or broken." Alara's fingers froze over her keyboard. Quan. Jinwoo Quan. The name was a titan in their world. He was the head of Apex Holdings, a global conglomerate with interests so vast and varied they were almost mythical. He was a ghost, a legend whispered about in boardrooms. He never gave interviews. He never attended galas. But his market movements were like acts of God, sudden, decisive, and irreversible. Apex was their primary competitor on the Kaido Mori deal, and by all accounts, they were losing. "It needs to look like an accident," a third voice chimed in, smoother, colder. "Unfortunate, tragic. A man of his stature has enemies. It's a messy business. We just provide the opportunity." A cold dread, sharp and immediate, pierced through Alara's exhaustion. This was not a metaphorical discussion about a hostile takeover. The words hung in the air, ugly and solid. Accident, tragic, messy business. They were talking about killing him, about murdering Jinwoo Quan. Her heart began a frantic, panicked tattoo against her ribs, a wild bird trapped in a cage of bone. She felt the blood drain from her face, leaving her skin icy. She should move. She should gather her things, slip out the emergency exit, and disappear into the night. Pretend she heard nothing. Delete the memory. But her body was locked in place, a statue of terror. The conversation continued, a litany of horrific details, routes, schedules, vulnerabilities. They spoke of a man's life with the detached calculus of a business transaction, another line item on a spreadsheet of acceptable risk. "And the analyst?" the gravelly voice asked. "The one who runs the numbers? Thorne, you said she's a ghost. All the good work, none of the credit. What about her?" Marcus laughed. It was a sound stripped of all warmth, a dry, rasping noise. "Elara, don't worry about her. She's loyal. Or, if not loyal, then she's broken. Same difference. She does what she's told. She's a good girl, a perfect asset. She wouldn't know what to do with a thought of her own if it landed in her lap. The insult was so precise, so dismissive, it was like a physical blow. Broken. He had not just taken her work. He had been actively dismantling her spirit, piece by piece, and cataloging his progress. He was working from a version of her that he himself had authored, a fiction of compliance and fear, and the most terrifying part was how close to the truth it felt. For 3 years, she had been silent. She had absorbed the slights, the stolen credit, the casual condescension. She had mistaken endurance for strength. Then came the final chilling sentence from Marcus, the one that sealed her fate. Once the deal is closed and Quan is out of the picture, we'll clean house, tidy up any loose ends. She's a loose end. She was not just an asset to be used. She was a liability to be discarded. The realization was a shard of ice in her gut. Her silence had not bought her safety. It had only bought her time on a list. The blood rushed back to her head, hot and furious. The fear was still there, a screaming chorus in her mind, but something else rose to meet it, a cold, hard clarity. He had miscalculated. He had mistaken her quiet for weakness, her patience for passivity. He had not updated the file. He was working from a version of her that had just expired. She did not scream. She did not gasp. With movements that felt both infinitely slow and blindingly fast, she slid her laptop into its sleeve, gathered her purse, and slipped her coat from the back of her chair. Every motion was silent, deliberate. The floor was a minefield of potential creaks and rustles. She moved like a phantom through the darkened bullpen, her sensible heels making no sound on the plush carpeting. She reached the elevator bank, her finger hovering over the button. The light would announce her departure. They would hear the chime. No, the fire stairs. She pushed through the heavy metal door, the stark concrete and bare fluorescent lighting a shocking contrast to the polished marble of the hallway. The door clicked shut behind her with the finality of a cell door. 47 flights. She started down, her hand gripping the cold metal rail, her breath coming in ragged, shallow bursts. Each step was a prayer, a mantra. He's wrong. He's wrong. He's wrong. She was not broken. She was bent, and she was about to snap back. She had to warn him. She had to warn Jin Woo Quan before they could turn their monstrous words into reality. She had no idea how she would do it. She only knew that her life, and his, now depended on it. The descent was a plunge into a new, terrifying world, and with every flight of stairs, she left the ghost of the compliant girl further and further behind. Finding a man like Jin Woo Quan was like trying to photograph a shadow. He had no public social media, no press photos newer than a decade, and the address for Apex Holdings was a sleek, impenetrable tower of black glass that seemed to absorb light and repel inquiry. For 2 days, Alara lived in a state of high-strung, vibrating fear. She called in sick to work, a flimsy excuse that Marcus likely saw right through. She stayed in her small apartment, the blinds drawn, jumping at every creak of the floorboards in the hallway outside. She was a loose end, a problem to be tidied up. The words echoed in her mind. She tried the official channels first, a carefully worded email to an anonymous tip line at Apex, mentioning a credible threat to Mr. Kwan's safety. It felt like dropping a note in a bottle into the ocean. She tried calling the main switchboard, her voice disguised, asking to speak to his head of security. She was met with a polite, impenetrable wall of corporate protocol. These were the actions of an ordinary person trying to reach an extraordinary one. It was futile. By the 3rd night, desperation had set in. Her savings were meager, not enough to disappear for long. Marcus would be looking for her. He would assume she had simply quit at first. Then his paranoia would fester. He would remember the open door. He would wonder what she heard. Her apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like a trap. The city outside, a labyrinth with no exit. She was researching private security firms, a desperate, last-ditch idea, when she found a name buried in a Financial Journal article about Apex's philanthropic arm. Soo-Jin Park, the elderly chairwoman of a foundation for the arts that Apex funded lavishly. The article mentioned she was Jin-Woo Kwan's grandmother, the quiet matriarch of the family. It also listed the address of a small private art gallery she curated in a quiet, historic part of the city. It was a thread, a fragile, improbable thread, but the only one she had. The gallery was a small, unassuming brick building nestled between an antiquarian bookshop and a bespoke tailor. A simple, elegant sign read, "The Serenity Gallery." Rain was falling, a miserable, persistent drizzle that matched the gray anxiety clinging to her. She pushed open the heavy oak door, a small bell chiming her arrival. The space was warm and silent, smelling of old wood, lemon oil, and something floral. It was a world away from the cold steel and glass she was used to. An old woman sat behind a simple wooden desk, her hair a perfect cloud of white, her eyes dark and intelligent, behind a pair of delicate spectacles. She looked up from a large book, her gaze missing nothing. It was Soo-Jin Park. She looked exactly like her photograph. "May I help you?" Her voice was soft, but carried a quiet authority. Ilara's carefully rehearsed speech dissolved on her tongue. Her terror, bottled up for 3 days, suddenly felt immense, overwhelming. I need to speak with Mr. Kwan," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "It's a matter of life and death. His life." The old woman's expression did not change. There was no shock, no dismissal, just a deep, patient observation. It was as if she had been waiting. She studied Ilara's face. The pale skin, the dark circles of sleeplessness under her eyes, the frantic terror that she could not hide. "You are Ilara Vance," Soo-Jin said. It was not a question. The blood drained from Ilara's face. How do you know my name?" "My grandson is a very thorough man," she said simply, as if that explained everything. "He has been aware of your work for some time, and of the man who takes credit for it." She gestured to a chair opposite the desk. "Please, sit, tell me everything." As Ilara recounted the story, the words tumbling out in a torrent of fear and adrenaline, she felt a profound sense of disorientation. She was telling this elegant old woman about a murder plot, and the woman was listening with the calm, focused attention of a chess master considering her next move. When Ilara finished, her voice raw, the gallery was silent save for the gentle drumming of rain against the window panes. Soo-Jin reached for a phone on her desk, a sleek, modern device that seemed at odds with the antique surroundings. She pressed a single button. It was answered instantly. "She is here," Soo-Jin said into the phone, her eyes still on Ilara. "Yes, as you thought. Come to the gallery." She ended the call and placed the phone back on the desk. "He is coming." The words hung in the air, freighted with meaning. As you thought. He had been expecting her. He knew, or he suspected. The thought was both terrifying and strangely comforting. She was not screaming into the void. Someone was already listening. They waited in a comfortable silence. Soo-Jin made them tea, her movements graceful and unhurried. The tea was fragrant and warm, and it helped to steady the tremor in Ilara's hands. She felt as though she had stepped through a looking glass, into a world that operated on a different set of rules, with a different sense of time. Less than 15 minutes later, a long, black car, silent as a shark, pulled up to the curb. The rain seemed to part for it. A man emerged from the driver's side, holding a large black umbrella, and opened the rear door. The man who stepped out was Jin-Woo Kwan. He was nothing like she had imagined. The decade-old photos showed a younger man, sharp and intense. The man who entered the gallery was defined by a profound stillness. He was not performing power, he simply possessed it. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, the dark gray fabric seeming to absorb the room's ambient light. His presence was not loud or imposing, but it changed the very atmosphere of the space. The air grew heavier, more focused, the kind of silence that doesn't echo, the kind that settles. He did not rush. He did not look agitated. He walked over to his grandmother, bowed his head slightly in a gesture of deep respect, and then turned his full attention to Ilara. His eyes were dark, like polished obsidian, and his gaze was unnervingly direct. He saw everything. He saw her fear, her exhaustion, and the core of steel beneath it that had driven her here. "Miss Vance," he said. His voice was a low, calm baritone, steady as iron wrapped in silk. "Thank you for coming. You have taken a great risk." Before she could respond, her phone buzzed violently in her pocket. The screen lit up with a name that made her stomach clench: Marcus Thorne. She ignored it. It buzzed again and again, a frantic, demanding summons. "He knows you are gone," Jinwoo stated, his eyes flicking to her pocket. "He is beginning to panic. A panicked man is a predictable man." As if on cue, the bell over the gallery door chimed violently. The door flew open, and Marcus Thorne stood there, silhouetted against the gray, rainy street. He was soaked, his expensive suit darkened with rain, his usually perfect hair plastered to his forehead. His face was a mask of fury and wild-eyed panic. He had clearly been searching for her. How he found her here, she couldn't fathom, but his desperate energy was that of a cornered animal. "Ilara!" he snarled, his voice a harsh rasp that violated the gallery's tranquility. "What the hell are you doing? You have a contract, an obligation. You can't just disappear." His eyes scanned the room, landing on Jinwoo Kwon. A flicker of confusion crossed his face, followed by a dawning, arrogant recognition. He did not see a threat. He saw a rival. "Kwon," he sneered, a pathetic attempt to reclaim control of the situation. "What is this? Trying to poach my top analyst? It won't work. She's mine." The word, mine, hung in the air, obscene and possessive. It was the final confirmation of how he saw her, not as a person, but as property. Jinwoo Kwon did not raise his voice. He did not move. He simply looked at Marcus, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Thorne," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, yet it carried across the room with absolute authority. "You are mistaken." He took a half step, placing himself subtly between Marcus and Ilara. It was not a dramatic gesture, but it was definitive. A line had been drawn. "She is not yours," Jinwoo continued, his voice still unnervingly calm. "And you will not speak to her again. You will leave this gallery. Now." Marcus sputtered, his face flushing a blotchy red. The sheer audacity of the command, delivered with such quiet finality, short-circuited his brain. "You can't, She works for me." "Security," Jinwoo said, speaking to no one in particular. From the black car outside, two men in dark suits emerged. They moved with a fluid, unnerving efficiency, without wasted motion. They entered the gallery and stood on either side of the doorway, their presence immense and silent. They were not police officers. They were something else entirely. Marcus's bravado finally shattered, replaced by a primal instinctive fear. He had brought a boardroom knife to a gunfight he didn't even know was happening. He looked from Jinwoo's placid face to the two silent sentinels at the door, and the structure of his world began to collapse. He had overestimated his own power so completely that it was laughable. He took a stumbling step back, his eyes wide with terror. He opened his mouth, then closed it. There were no words. His performed power had vanished, leaving only a hollow, frightened man in a wet suit. He turned and fled into the rain, the two men melting back into the car as silently as they had appeared. The bell chimed softly as the door closed, and the gallery was quiet once more. The storm outside seemed to have passed. Ilara stood, trembling, the adrenaline of the confrontation leaving her weak. Jinwoo turned back to her. His expression was unchanged, but she thought she saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Respect, perhaps. "Now," he said, his voice once again a calm, steady anchor in the disorienting sea of the last few days. "Let's get you somewhere safe." The drive was silent. Ilara sat in the back of the black car, the leather cool against her skin, the city slipping by outside the tinted windows like a watercolor painting dissolving in the rain. The car did not feel like a car. It felt like a vault, a space sealed off from the noise and chaos of the world she had just fled. Beside her, Jinwoo Kwon sat in a pool of profound stillness. He did not look at his phone. He did not speak. He simply existed, his presence a silent promise of security that was more potent than any spoken reassurance. Ilara's mind was a whirlwind. Marcus's face contorted with rage and then with fear, the quiet authority in Jinwoo's voice, the two silent men who had appeared from nowhere. She had stepped out of her life and into his, and she had no idea what the rules were here. The fear was still a low hum beneath the surface, but it was changing. The sharp, frantic terror of being hunted was slowly being replaced by a deep, disorienting awe at the scale of the power she had just witnessed. It was not the hollow, performative power of Marcus Thorne. This was structural. It was deep, quiet, and absolute. They arrived at a modern skyscraper of black steel and glass that seemed to pierce the low-hanging clouds. The garage door slid open without a sound, and they descended into a private, brightly lit sublevel. Another man, dressed in a similar dark suit, was waiting. He opened Ilara's door. "Ms. Choi will show you to the penthouse," Jinwoo said, his voice bringing her out of her reverie. He was not getting out of the car. "I have some business to attend to. It will not take long." His eyes met hers, and for a moment, the mask of placid control slipped. She saw a flicker of something cold and hard, a glimpse of the ruthlessness that must lie beneath the calm exterior. He was going to handle the threat, permanently. The thought should have terrified her, but it didn't. It brought a strange, unsettling sense of relief. A woman with a chic, severe haircut and an impeccably tailored dress stepped forward. She bowed her head slightly. "Miss Vance, I am Ms. Choi, Mr. Kwan's executive assistant. Please follow me." Her voice was crisp and professional, her efficiency a mirror of her employer's. Ilara followed her into a private elevator. There were no buttons, only a small, discreet panel where Ms. Choi placed her thumb. The elevator ascended with a silent, stomach-dropping speed. "Mr. Kwan apologizes for the abruptness of these arrangements," Ms. Choi said, her eyes fixed on the elevator doors. "Your safety is his primary concern. We have taken the liberty of retrieving some essentials for you. Anything else you require, you need only ask." "Retrieving?" Ilara asked, her voice faint. "From my apartment?" "Yes, it was best that you not return there. Mr. Thorne is volatile. It is no longer a secure location." The casual way she said it sent a chill down Ilara's spine. They had been in her apartment. They had moved through her life with the same silent efficiency as everything else. The elevator doors opened directly into a vast living space. The penthouse was a masterpiece of minimalist design. Floor-to-ceiling windows on three sides offered a staggering, godlike view of the city below, its lights a sprawling galaxy of human endeavor. The furniture was sparse and elegant, the colors muted grays, creams, and blacks. It was less a home than a statement of absolute control. It was beautiful, but it was sterile. It was the architectural equivalent of Jinwoo Kwan himself. In the center of the room, on a low black table, sat a steaming pot of tea and 2 cups. His grandmother, Soo-jin Park, was sitting on a low sofa, a gentle smile on her face. "I thought you might appreciate a familiar face," she said warmly. "This can all be very overwhelming." Ilara felt a wave of gratitude so intense it almost brought tears to her eyes. The old woman's presence was a small, warm hearth in the vast, cold space. "Thank you," she whispered. Ms. Choi bowed and retreated, leaving them alone. Ilara sank onto the sofa opposite Soo-jin, the plush cushion a stark contrast to the hard edges of the room. She accepted the cup of tea, its warmth seeping into her chilled fingers. "My grandson does not bring people into his life," Soo-jin said, her gaze thoughtful as she looked out at the city. "Not like this. He has watched you for a long time, you know, through the financials. He saw your mind at work in the quarterly reports from Thorne's company. He said it was like finding a beautiful, intricate schematic drawn by a master, but signed by a child. Ilara stared at her, speechless. He had seen her all this time when she had felt invisible, when she thought her work was being thrown into a void. He had seen it. He had recognized her. The validation was so profound, so unexpected, it felt like a physical blow. It was a disorienting relief, like the first deep breath after being held underwater for too long. He knew Thorne was a fraud, Soo-jin continued, but more than that, he knew he was a reckless man, and reckless men become dangerous. He has been monitoring the situation. So this was not an accident. His arrival at the gallery was not a coincidence. He had been watching, waiting. The knowledge settled into her, a complex mix of fear and gratitude. She was not just a damsel in distress he had stumbled upon. She was a person of interest, a variable in an equation he was already solving. It made her feel less like a victim and more like a participant, albeit one who had been unaware she was even in the game. She spent the next few hours talking with Soo-jin. The old woman spoke of her grandson, of his quiet intensity, of the immense weight of the empire he controlled. She spoke of him not as a titan of industry or a fearsome mafia boss, but as a boy who had learned too early that the world was a dangerous place, and that the only true safety was in strength, control, and loyalty. Later that night, Jin-woo returned. He entered the penthouse as silently as he had left it. He had changed from his suit into a simple black cashmere sweater and dark trousers. He looked younger, less formidable, but the stillness was still there. He nodded to his grandmother, who rose gracefully. "I will leave you too," Soo-jin said, patting Ilara's hand. "Remember what I said, child. You are safer here than anywhere else in the world." She left, and the silence she left behind was different, more charged. Jin-woo walked over to the windows, his hands clasped behind his back. He stood for a long moment, looking down at the city. "Thorne will no longer be a problem," he said, his voice low. He did not elaborate. He did not need to. The statement was absolute, a door closing firmly on a chapter of her life. He turned to face her. "Ms. Choi has prepared the guest wing for you. You may stay as long as you need. All of my resources are at your disposal, legal, financial, anything." It was an offer of a gilded cage, however well-intentioned. The fear of dependency, a fear Marcus had so expertly cultivated in her, flared in her chest. "I can't just," she began, but the words caught in her throat. What was the alternative? Go back to her apartment? Try to find a new job, a new life, while constantly looking over her shoulder? He seemed to read her thoughts. "This is not a cage, Miss Vance," he said, his voice softening almost imperceptibly. "It is a fortress, and the door is open. But the world outside is not safe for you right now. Here, you have time. You can think. You can decide what comes next." He paused. "I have a proposition for you. A job, if you want it. Not for me, but with me. The Kaido Mori deal. Your analysis was brilliant, but it was incomplete. You were working with flawed data supplied by Thorne. I have the correct data. I would like you to finish what you started. As my partner." The offer was breathtaking. A partnership. A seat at the table she had only ever been allowed to set. It was a recognition of her competence so complete, so direct, that it overshadowed everything else. It was not charity. It was a business proposition between equals. One had the resources and the power. The other had the intellect. "Why?" she asked, the word a whisper. "Why me?" He finally moved, crossing the space between them to stand a few feet away. He looked at her, and for the first time she felt he was not just observing her, but truly seeing her. "Because," he said, his voice steady and clear, "you have been the most capable person in every room you have ever been in, and no one has ever had the decency to tell you." The days that followed were a study in quiet recalibration. Ilara lived in the guest wing of the penthouse, a suite of rooms so luxurious they felt like a high-end hotel. But it was the silence that she noticed most. A deep, profound quiet that was the product of immense wealth and power. Soundproofed walls, triple-paned glass, a location so high above the city that its constant roar was reduced to a distant, gentle hum. It was the kind of silence that allowed you to hear your own thoughts for the first time in years. She spent her time working. Jin-woo had a secure office set up for her, complete with a state-of-the-art terminal linked directly to Apex Holdings' encrypted servers. The data he provided on the Kaitomori merger was a revelation. It was the complete picture, the raw, unredacted truth of the deal. Seeing it, she finally understood the full scope of Marcus's deception. He wasn't just taking credit for her work. He had been feeding her manipulated data, using her brilliance to analyze a fictional scenario while he pursued a much darker, more leveraged path. He had been planning to strip Kaitomori for parts, a corporate raid that would have destroyed thousands of jobs, all while using her legitimate analysis as a smokescreen. The cold fury that filled her was a clean, righteous anger. It burned away the last vestiges of her fear. Jin-woo was a quiet presence. He would leave for hours at a time, disappearing into the city to run his vast empire. But he was always there for dinner. They ate together in a small, intimate dining room overlooking the city lights. Their conversations were rarely personal. They spoke of the markets, of geopolitical risk, of corporate strategy. He would listen to her theories, his head tilted slightly, his dark eyes focused on her with an unnerving intensity. He never condescended, he never interrupted. He simply listened, absorbing her words, and would then offer a quiet, insightful question that would push her thinking in a new direction. It was in these moments that their relationship began to form. It was not a romance built on passion or flirtation, but on a slow, dawning recognition of a peer. He saw the sharp, beautiful machinery of her mind. She saw the immense, disciplined intelligence behind his quiet exterior. He provided the safety and the resources. She provided insight and a perspective that his controlled, isolated world rarely allowed him to see. It was a partnership taking root in the sterile soil of his penthouse. One evening, she found him in the living room, not looking out at the city, but at a single, perfect orchid sitting on a side table. "My grandmother brings them," he said, without turning around. "She says the place needs life." "She's right," Alara said, walking to stand beside him. "It's beautiful, but it's sterile." He turned his head to look at her, a faint ghost of a smile touching his lips. "I have been told I lack a certain domestic warmth." The dry wit was so unexpected it startled a laugh out of her. It was the first time she had truly laughed in weeks, and the sound felt foreign and wonderful in the quiet room. "I wouldn't go that far," she said. "You have a very specific aesthetic, the impenetrable fortress look." "It has served me well," he said, his smile fading, his expression growing serious. "But a fortress can also be a prison." He looked back at the city. "Thorne has begun his next move. As I predicted." Alara's good mood evaporated, replaced by a familiar knot of anxiety. "What did he do?" "He has filed a series of frivolous lawsuits," Jin-woo explained, his voice devoid of emotion. "Against you, for breach of contract and theft of intellectual property. Against me, for corporate espionage. It is a desperate public tantrum. He believes he can drag us into a protracted legal battle, create enough noise and scandal to force a negotiation." The arrogance was staggering. Even after everything, Marcus still believed he was in control. He thought he could use the law, the system he had always manipulated, as a weapon. He was operating on the assumption that they were playing the same game. He had no idea Jin-woo Kwon did not play games. He owned the stadium, the teams, and the league itself. "He is a fool," Ilara said, the words sharp. "He is," Jin-woo agreed. "He has completely misjudged the situation. He thinks you are a pawn he can sacrifice. He thinks I am a rival he can wound. He has not considered the possibility that you are the queen, and I am simply clearing the board for you." The statement hung in the air between them, intimate and profound. "You are the queen." It was the most validating thing anyone had ever said to her. He didn't see her as a victim to be rescued, but as a powerful piece that had been trapped and was now being liberated. He has also hired a team of private investigators to follow you, Jinwoo added, his tone hardening slightly. Or rather, to attempt to. My security team has been retasking them. Ilara imagined the bumbling investigators, hired by a desperate Marcus, being quietly and efficiently neutralized by Jinwoo's silent, competent men. The image was almost comical. What is he hoping to find? She asked. Scandal, leverage, something he can use to paint you as unstable, untrustworthy. He believes if he can destroy your reputation, he can invalidate your claims. Jinwoo turned to face her fully, his expression unreadable. There is an event next week, the Obsidian Gala. It is the single most important annual gathering for our industry. Everyone will be there. Thorne will be there. He will use it as a stage. You want me to go? The thought of facing that world again, of seeing Marcus, sent a tremor of fear through her. I want you to be there with me, he corrected her gently. He will attempt to crash a private event. My event. He will try to confront you publicly, to humiliate you. It will be his final, fatal miscalculation. He is walking into a trap he doesn't even know exists. This was his plan. Not to fight Marcus in the shadows, but to let Marcus destroy himself in the brightest possible light. It was ruthless. It was brilliant. What happens at the gala? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. He loses everything, Jinwoo said simply, and you, Miss Vance. You get everything back. He looked at her, his dark eyes holding hers. The only question is, are you ready? She thought about the last 3 years, the quiet humiliation, the stolen credit, the slow, grinding erosion of her sense of self. She thought about Marcus's sneering voice calling her broken. She thought about the cold dread in the stairwell and the quiet dignity of Soo-jin in the gallery and the profound, world-altering feeling of being truly seen by the man standing in front of her. Yes, she said, her voice clear and strong, without a trace of a tremor. I'm ready. The night of the Obsidian Gala, the air in the city crackled with wealth and power. The gala was held at the top of the newly constructed Elysian Tower, a building that had reshaped the skyline. The main ballroom was a cavern of glass and steel, offering a 360-degree view of the city glittering below. It was a room designed to make mortals feel like gods. And tonight, it was Jinwoo Kwan's room. Apex Holdings had sponsored the event, a quiet display of dominance that everyone in attendance understood. Ilara stood beside him near the entrance, a silent partner in his reign. She wore an emerald green gown, a column of silk that was both elegant and severe. It was a dress that did not ask for attention, but commanded it. For the first time in years, she felt not like a shadow or an asset, but like herself. The woman she was supposed to be before Marcus Thorne had tried to edit her out of her own life. Jinwoo was, as always, a study in controlled stillness. He wore a black tuxedo tailored with such precision it seemed a part of him. He introduced her to a select few people, captains of industry, financial power brokers, with a simple, definitive phrase, "This is Ilara Vance, my partner." The words were a shield and a coronation all in one. He was not explaining her presence. He was announcing her arrival. She saw Marcus across the room. He was holding a glass of champagne, trying to project an aura of casual confidence, but failing miserably. He looked frayed at the edges. His suit seemed a little too tight, his smile a little too wide. He was a man drowning, trying to convince everyone he was just enjoying a swim. His eyes scanned the room, searching, and when they landed on her, they narrowed with a predatory gleam. He saw her standing next to Jinwoo Kwan, not as a guest, but as a hostess, a queen in her own court, and his fragile ego could not withstand it. He began to make his way toward them, a shark moving through a crowd that parted for him instinctively, sensing the desperate energy radiating from him. This was it, the fatal miscalculation. He was walking into the center of the board, just as Jinwoo had predicted. "Ilara," he said, his voice loud enough to draw the attention of those nearby. The conversations around them began to falter. "We need to talk, in private." "There is nothing for us to talk about, Marcus," she said, her voice calm and even. She was surprised by her own composure. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, clear pity. "Don't be ridiculous," he scoffed, his voice rising. "You have an obligation. You signed a non-disclosure agreement. Everything you worked on, everything you are, belongs to my company. You owe me." The sheer, breathtaking arrogance of the statement caused a ripple of murmurs through the onlookers. Jinwoo did not move, did not speak. He simply watched, letting Marcus dig his own grave. "You seem to be under a misapprehension, Mr. Thorne," Jinwoo said finally, his voice a low, quiet counterpoint to Marcus's frantic volume. The sound cut through the murmuring, and a heavy silence fell over their corner of the ballroom. All eyes were on them. "Stay out of this, Kwon," Marcus snarled. "This is between me and my employee." "First," Jinwoo said, his voice dangerously soft, "she is not your employee. Second, this is very much my business, because you see, the company you are referring to is also mine." He lifted his phone. The screen was lit up, displaying a series of official-looking documents. He didn't need to show them to Marcus. The statement alone was enough. It landed in the silent room like a detonation. Marcus stared at him, his face a mask of disbelief. "What? That's impossible. My company is private. It's not for sale." "Everything is for sale, Marcus," Jinwoo said, the use of his first name a deliberate, dismissive insult. "You were over-leveraged. You took out a series of high-risk loans to cover your losses on the Kaitomori bid. You secured those loans with a majority share of your company as collateral." He paused, letting the words sink in. "The holding company that issued those loans was a subsidiary of a private equity firm in Zurich. That firm, as of last Tuesday, is a wholly owned subsidiary of Apex Holdings. I own your debt, Marcus, and when you defaulted on your first payment yesterday morning, I took possession of your collateral. I own your company, I own your office, I own the desk you sit at. I even own the ridiculously overpriced pen you use to sign the documents Alara prepares for you." Each sentence was a perfectly placed blow, dismantling Marcus's reality piece by piece. The color drained from Marcus's face, leaving it a pasty, sickly gray. He looked around wildly, as if searching for an escape route, but he was surrounded by the silent, staring faces of his peers, all witnesses to his absolute and utter ruin. "The lawsuits," he stammered, clutching at the last straw. "My lawyers will—" "Your lawyers have already been contacted by my legal team," Jinwoo interrupted smoothly. "They were informed that their retainer would no longer be paid by the company, as the company's new owner considers the litigation to be without merit. They have already filed the motion to withdraw." "You have no company, Marcus. You have no lawyers. You have no money." The finality of it was absolute. It was not just a defeat. It was an erasure. Jinwoo had not just beaten him, he had unwritten him from the story of power and success. Marcus Thorne finally broke. A terrible, guttural sound tore from his throat, a noise of pure, animal despair. His carefully constructed world had been demolished in less than 60 seconds by a few quiet sentences. He dropped his champagne flute, the crystal shattering on the marble floor. His knees buckled and he sank to the ground, a puppet with its strings cut. He began to sob, great, racking, pathetic sobs of a man who had lost everything because he was too arrogant to see it was never truly his. Two of Jinwoo's men, dressed as gala security, materialized at his side. They lifted the weeping, broken man to his feet with quiet efficiency and escorted him from the ballroom. They did not drag him. They were not performing. They were simply removing a piece of trash that was spoiling the view. The ballroom was utterly silent for a long moment. Then, Jinwoo turned his attention back to the assembled crowd. He placed a hand gently on the small of Alara's back, a gesture of support and presentation. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice calm and clear, projecting easily across the silent room, "allow me to apologize for that unpleasantness." His eyes scanned the faces of the most powerful people in the city. "As the new owner of Thorne Industries, which will be restructured and renamed, I would like to introduce you to its new president and chief executive officer." He looked down at Alara, his dark eyes filled with a profound respect. "Miss Vance has been the true architect of that company's successes for the past 3 years. Her work has been exemplary. It is my distinct honor to finally place her in the position she has long since earned." He began to applaud, a slow, deliberate clap. For a heartbeat, there was silence, and then the entire room erupted in applause. It was a wave of sound, of acceptance, of vindication. It washed over Alara, cleansing the last remnants of the shame and invisibility she had lived with for so long. She looked out at the sea of faces, the titans of her industry, all applauding her. Not as Marcus's shadow, not as Jinwoo's ward, but as herself. Alara Vance, the new CEO. She felt a slow, steadying breath leave her body, an exhale she felt she had been holding for 3 years. A genuine smile, the first in what felt like a lifetime, reached her eyes. She turned to Jinwoo, the applause still thundering around them, a protective wall of sound. "Thank you," she whispered, the words inadequate for the magnitude of what he had done. "I did nothing," he said, his voice for her ears alone. "I simply corrected a market inefficiency." He offered her his arm. "Shall we, Madam CEO?" She took his arm, the fine wool of his tuxedo jacket solid and real beneath her fingers. Together, they turned away from the crowd and walked toward the vast wall of glass that overlooked the city. The lights spread out below them, a universe of infinite possibility. The wait was gone. The long, quiet suffering was over. This was not a happily ever after. She knew that. Life was more complicated than fairy tales, but it was a beginning, a real one. It was the moment she finally stepped into the light, recognized and whole, with a quiet, powerful man by her side who had seen her value when no one else had. It was a moment of profound, earned peace, the kind that settles deep in the bones. And as she looked out at the city, her city now, she knew that what came next would be a future they would build together, a partnership forged in crisis, built on respect, and solidified in the quiet, unshakable certainty of being truly, completely seen. The past was a ghost, and the future was a skyline waiting for its new architects.